24 hours a day. We're covering all that stuff at WNST.net. Luke Jones will be on the backfields in Owings Mills. Any breaking news comes to you first on the WNST text service. That is, of course, brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. Meantime, the first place Baltimore Orioles trudge on. And I know this next guest, I've been having him on for a couple of decades now. Been covering baseball for a long, long time. He is the national MLB columnist for Bleacher Report as well as Turner Sports, and you can follow his journey out on Twitter at Scott Miller BBL. We welcome one of our defending champions, Scott Miller, back onto the program. And Scott, when I say first place Baltimore Orioles at the end of July or August, I haven't had a chance to do that over 25 years of radio very often. We're sort of treasuring it, but we feel like the boogeyman's coming to get us in the trading deadline. Certainly the Red Sox have already sort of strengthened. The Blue Jays a little bit more on the come. What are the Orioles going to do this week, Scott?
You know, it's clear they've got to find a starting pitcher. Their offense, as we all know, is going to score a ton of runs. They've produced one of the most fun offenses to watch that there is, but they've got to get some pitching to go along with it. And the problem is the pitching market is not too good this year. And you've got names like Rich Hill of the Miami Marlins out there. Kind of a retread 36-year-old lefty that's to his credit, rediscovered some things this year, and he's having a very good year. But, whether the Orioles can land somebody like that, I don't know. They did talk with the Padres about Andrew Kashner and about, believe it or not, Melvin Upton Jr. And, with Kim on the disabled list and with Rickard hurting his thumb. Boy, that was a tough injury there. So I can see, gambling with somebody like Melvin Upton, but Toronto got him.
He can't pitch either.
No, he could swing that bat, but that's the thing. If I'm the Orioles, I'm all in on pitching, and I'm not even allowing myself to be distracted by any position players.
Well, and this is a real issue for the organization and the deep depth in the organization, and the Davies deal now and the Rodriguez deal, and obviously Arrieta. The Orioles have been in this for a couple of years. They have been the buyers in letting some younger pitching go to way, and now they have this incredible need, and the organization feels very, very thin when measuring up against other organizations trying to go get Rich Hill.
Well, yeah, it does, and can you imagine, speaking of letting pitching go away, how would you like this? I'm going to ask you a question. I'm going to turn the tables. How
Sure.
would you like this Orioles team right now, Nestor, if Jake Arrieta was in the rotation?
Well, we've talked about that only 10 times a day, every day since he became Koufax. I mean, look, all I saw out of him was ball one, trouble in the third inning, 6 walks, out of the game, and giving Buck indigestion. And I can't. You can lament it now, and we've seen it happen. In the history of baseball, guys move around, and sometimes a change of scenery really works. But the Arrieta story will never go unfinished here, especially if they win a World Series this year with him. And it feels like the Cubs again have loaded up with Chapman again. It feels like they're all in. That's for sure. I mean, everybody's chasing them at this point, right?
Yeah, they certainly are. And you know what? Chapman was a great pickup. The one weakness of the Cubs was their bullpen, and even at that, it wasn't a glaring weakness. It was an okay bullpen, but it wasn't a championship bullpen. And from that perspective, now you've got a Cubs bullpen that has a lights out closer in Chapman. Now, there are no guarantees in this game, and you know how that goes as much as I do, Nestor. I mean, all those Cubs fans that are so thrilled right now,
better not lose game one. That's what I'm saying to them. Better not lose game one in October. Whatever that means, Arrieta better not get beat when whomever comes in there, whether it's the Nationals, whether it's a wild card team, whoever it is, because that's how quickly things turn in October, right?
Well, that's exactly right. And what I was going to say is, can you imagine, after 108 years of never having won a World Series, the Cubs fans are so excited now. Can you imagine the Cubs in the World Series this October, and they get to Game 7, and they have the lead, and Chapman blows the save, and they lose the World Series? I mean, I'm not even making any prediction, and I don't mean to be cruel to any. I know your Orioles fans are listening, but if there are any Cubs fans listening, I certainly don't mean to be cruel. But I'm just throwing that out as an example of the crazy, crazy way this game works. Just when you think you have it figured out, something happens that shows you know nothing.
Well, and the trading deadline is always sort of this mythical gray area of how we get better before August 1st. And so many teams, the road is littered with teams that got better on July 31st, only to find themselves not better on October 1st, right?
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, they're just you never know. You go back to the Phillies won the World Series in 2008. Then the next year they got Cliff Lee, I believe it was the next year at the trade deadline, and or everybody, it was all hail Phillies. It was Halladay and Cliff Lee, and they didn't win with those two together.
It's fascinating for me, and I'm reading from your Twitter here, and, earlier in the day on Tuesday, sources said the Padres were close to dealing Upton, but Angelos changed his mind. The fan base here still doesn't believe that, and he's bought off the media and banished guys like me from ever asking questions. I haven't had a press pass in 10 years, but this is kind of how it really works. Like, Duquette is publicly sort of involved in it, and Buck sort of straddles the fence, but when it really comes down to it, the old man's going to make up his mind whether he really wants Chris Davis or not, whether he really wants to make a deal or not, whether he's really going to give Gallardo a 3-year deal or a 2-year deal. You're dealing with Peter even if you never talk to Peter here.
Yeah, and I'm going to give you just a quick minute of heresy here.
Sure.
And defend him for a minute,
sure.
Believe it or not.
Well, it is his franchise. It is his money. It is.
Well, yeah, and that's what I was going to say. The thing with modern baseball, when you get into these multi-million-dollar deals, like Melvin Upton Jr., $16 million next year and change, whoever it is, big-time free agents, it isn't unusual that kind of money, those kind of contracts, whatever the franchise, they all run up the chain to the owner's office. In other words, when the Cubs, take them as an example, when they acquired Aroldis Chapman, even though he's a free agent this winter and he's only got, basically a rental for 3 months, Theo Epstein told the media in Chicago that, they agreed to the deal over the weekend and in principle, and then he ran it up the chain to the owner's office. And of course, Tom Ricketts and the Ricketts family said, yeah, let's go for it. So it happens, and especially when millions of dollars are changing hands, because the Padres were not going to, the only way they were going to let Melvin Upton go is if they knew they were going to have to eat a lot of that contract, but they were trying to get their trade partner to eat as much of it as they could. The deal with Toronto, the Padres ended up getting Toronto to pay $5 million. So the Padres, including this year with Upton, he had about $22 million left. So the Padres ended up paying about $17 million of that. Toronto kicked in $5 million. So whoever that is, the Blue Jays were going to run it up to ownership when all those millions of dollars. So that's the only thing I'm going to defend Angelos on is it's
for me, it's just the notion that he's involved or he's not involved, because they would always say he's never involved, but he's always involved. And I guess as a journalist, that's the issue that I have, is that they would always absolve and say, no, Dan's running the show. Dan's not running the show, So, I mean, to pull that curtain back is obvious to me and probably to you, but to the fans here, it's, man, Duquette failed us. Duquette can't get anything, because that's the way it rolls here with the fan base.
Right, and there's no question. I told you I was going to defend Angelos just for a minute, and which I just did. Now, the flip side is, there's no question that the Orioles run differently than most teams, and that Angelos has, he's given more mixed signals, let me put it that way, than most owners do. There's a whole line of rival teams that have come to the Orioles and thought they had a deal only to have it changed at the last minute. That's the unusual part with Angelos.
Including the city of Vero Beach and the city of Fort Lauderdale. I mean, including me, including anyone that's ever dealt with him, including a guy who's written a book. And, I mean, it really is sort of whatever side of the bed he rolls off on and how he feels personally about some of the players in the Brian Robertson. Getting involved in it it's different, but he's very involved, and that's the part. That's the part that I think is a tough sell here as to how involved he is, because he's never around, right? I mean, he really is a mystery to all of this. But again, on Tuesday morning, he got involved in whether Justin Upton's going to be playing for the Orioles tonight or not, and he's not, and it's because Peter was involved. Because clearly Dan did all the footwork to get it done, right?
Yeah, it's like the Wizard of Oz. It's like the wizard behind the curtain, no question.
Well, and, Scott Miller's joining us here. He covers all things baseball. Look, I want to get to other teams here and other issues. You were up in Cooperstown. Obviously lovely up there. I know you're a voter. From the outset, look, I got my cousin's names on the plaque in the wall in there. I've always loved the Hall of Fame. I love Jeff Idelson and all the people up there. But every year when this thing comes around, it feels in some way diminished, and not because I want Barry Bonds or Pete Rose or anybody else to be in there, just because of how tawdry it all is when they're not, and you say, well, why aren't they? And then the whole A-Rod thing's coming next down the line. It is nice to see guys like Griffey and Piazza, deserving guys, get in, but it always sort of opens this festering wound of the steroid era and who is and who isn't and who will never be, right?
Well, it does, and a couple thoughts on that. There's no good answer there. I have been a Hall of Fame voter for about 16, 17 years now. I'm one that does not vote for the steroid guys, so I have left Bonds, Clemens, et cetera, off my ballot.
Is that part of it that you don't want to go up there on a hot summer day and see them honored in that way when they're not worthy of being honored? Is that part of it for you, that would disturb you a little bit?
Well, you know what? I know a lot of people out there that are in favor of those guys would not believe me and don't believe me because they say, well, it's a personal thing. And it really isn't. It's not. The reason I don't vote for them, it's not that I personally would, be uncomfortable and that I personally would be angry if I was in Cooperstown one day and Bonds was up on the podium. Basically, I think, Nestor, over the years, I think the commissioner abdicated his responsibility early on in coming to his anti-steroid rules way sooner than baseball did. I think the Players Union abdicated their responsibility. I mean, we can go back to when Don Fehr was running it, and his pit bull right-hand man, Gene Orza, said steroids were he likened to cigarette smoking. He said they don't do anything. So we go to the Players Union, all these people that, dropped their responsibility and should have figured this out years and years ago. Now, after that, basically the thing has fallen onto the laps of the baseball writers who vote for the Hall of Fame. Who
were vilified, by the way. Tom Verducci, Tom Boswell, anybody, Beaton, all those guys, when they were wondering what the hell was in all those jars of milkshakes and guys, heads getting as big as balloons. I was in all those locker rooms, Scott. The media were treated as the heretics, truly.
Well, yeah, and so the thing is, Nestor, it comes down to now I get my Hall of Fame ballot in December. So everything I just said about those in power in the game abdicating their responsibility. So now I've got to make a judgment. And to me, there's always been right and wrong, and steroids have been wrong. It screwed up the rule book. It screwed up a lot of things in the game. And even though it wasn't against baseball's rules, it was against the federal laws of the land, and people knew they were doing wrong. That's why it was all done in the wintertime and behind closed doors. It wasn't like people were doing steroids in the clubhouse. So the players, these guys knew it was wrong. So basically, to me, as an individual voter, I'm not on a big-time crusade to keep all these guys out. I think individually, you've got to look yourself in the mirror and ask yourself some hard questions. And I've just decided if I, in my own little way, with one ballot, can make a stand for what's right and what's wrong in my own mind, then I'm going to do it. I wish I didn't have to do it, but I'm going to do it. And that's it. And
well, let me say this. It is a personal thing for you. The personal thing is integrity and honesty and being on the up and up. And I applaud you for that because I wouldn't vote for them either. But then when August comes and you go up there, it is diminished what it is. I mean, I drove in the middle of my tour last year from Boston out into the fields of Cooperstown, woke up there, got treated like gold. I love the place. I love the gift shops. I love walking around town and getting a donut and seeing all the baseball history and all the. But all of that's being said, the whole thing is sort of cheapened to some degree by this 25-year tragedy of baseball that is far, far from over. And I know some people are trying to sweep it under the rug and say, well, they had the stats, vote them in, get it over with. Well, then you're going to be holding your nose for the next 15 years as all of these guys who, quote unquote, lack integrity, according to me, and cheated the game and cheated themselves, but they've made hundreds of millions of dollars. So we won't all have to ask ourselves that question. For me, it were the fringe players that got cheated that really disturbs me, that if you weren't going to do something illegal and unsafe, you weren't going to be playing Major League Baseball very long or at that kind of level. You were going to be relegated to being a AAA guy or a bench guy. And I think that's the dirty little part of all of it for me.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And that is why, I don't just blame the commissioner for not doing anything. That's where I blame the players' union. They're just as complicit as the commissioner. Because while Don Fehr and Gene Orza were staunchly refusing to allow steroid testing talk because they said, it's a matter of individual rights. While that was happening, the clean players in the union, the players should have banded together and gone to Fehr and Orza and said, look, this isn't right because I'm trying to hold on to my job. I don't want to have to continue I don't want to have to do steroids to keep my job. And the way things are going, that's what's going to happen. We need to weed the cheaters out. So the players could have done some things too. That's why I like today's players are much more on board with that than the old guys back in the 80s and 90s. I mean, you saw that. Dee Gordon gets popped for an 80-game suspension. Justin Verlander's on Twitter ripping the steroid users, as were many other players. And the players are the ones that finally, under Michael Weiner, Don Fehr's successor, the players were the ones that said, we're ready to go. We want testing. And, so what you just said, I agree. The tragedy is the fringe players that got squeezed out of the game. And I just wish back in the day the players' union would have taken care of those guys as well, not just the Barry Bonds of the world.
Scott Miller has covered baseball for a long, long time at a very high level. You can follow his journey out on Twitter at Scott Miller BBL. He is the national MLB columnist for Bleacher Report as well as Turner Sports, and love having him on, love talking baseball. So if I give you $1 right now, Scott, on the American League East, it's been my game all week, are you betting it on the Red Sox, the Blue Jays, or the Orioles right now to be the division winner?
I picked the Red Sox to win the division coming out of spring training, and so I see no reason why I should deviate from that. I feel for Orioles fans, I hope your club locally there gets a pitcher or two before the deadline is over, Nestor. One thing I didn't realize, even covering baseball as deeply as I have for so many years, Tyler Kepner of the New York Times had a very interesting column on the Orioles late last week, and he pointed out that the Orioles have had more wins over the last 5 years combined than any other American League team. That stunned me. I knew they were toward the top. I didn't realize if you rack them and add them all up over 5 years, the Orioles have had more wins than anybody. I just, you look at it that way, you figure the Orioles deserve some October success. I'd love to see them have some October success. That's why, I say, good luck to the Orioles in getting a pitcher or two this year, because I think if they do that, they have a team that can have some October success. But I don't think so as presently constituted.
One thing sitting from afar here in first place with a relevant baseball team and Machado on the cusp of greatness and Scope moving to another level and seeing Trumbo play well this year, just seeing all these teams come through with great young players and seeing that out in San Diego last month as well, that All-Star game that should have been in Baltimore, by the way. That's a whole other segment, by the way, Scott, you and I, about how the All-Star game was supposed to be here 2 weeks ago and it's not. But seeing the young players, even this this week the Rockies come through, and I'm thinking, well, what do I know about the Rockies? Well, they got about 5 guys that I'd like to have on my team, and Arenado and Story and a second baseman. They just brought Dial up. I mean, and that's just one team. I mean, Correa and Altuve down at Houston. I mean, even though the Twins are struggling this year, they've got some nice young talent. There's a lot of that going on all the way around the game, and it's no longer just the Harper Trout show. A lot of young guys have shown up this year to say, I want in that conversation too.
Yeah, I think we're entering another golden age of baseball because you're right. I mean, you look at Manny Machado in Baltimore, what he's done, and, Carlos Correa in Houston, Mookie Betts, Jackie Bradley Jr. in Boston. I mean, there is some really, really terrific young talent, and I think it's a convergence of things. I really do. I think one reason is, kids today just grow up faster and have access to more than the old players did at a younger age. When you're 16, 17 years old, you have different training methods and you're playing baseball all the time. I just think kids are more athletic today. I think that's one reason. I think another reason is, you look at now that we're through, I don't think we'll ever have a 100% clean game, but I do think with steroid testing now, there's no question there's more of an emphasis on younger talent because, suddenly guys who are in their 30s are playing like it. It used to be you'd be 35 years old, you'd be playing like you're 25.
Well, other than David Ortiz, but nobody's ever questioned him, right? I mean, he really is the exception to all of this, right? Right.
Yeah, he is. And, he's subject to testing just like everybody else. And, he hasn't failed anything. So, until something happens, if it would ever happen, I'm certainly not sitting here predicting it. And I happen to like Ortiz a lot. I would be very disappointed if a positive steroid test popped up. I've talked to David myself a lot about the subject, including, after Manny Ramirez got suspended, his old teammate in Boston, and he was very outspoken to me years ago about Manny Ramirez, and very expressed bitter disappointment that Manny would choose that route. So. Maybe Ortiz is the one guy from our generation that is the exception and is doing all these great things. Hopefully because he's a freak of nature, not because he's got a little help.
Scott Miller, talking all things baseball. We're getting up on the trading deadline. It's great to have relevant baseball. I'll always love having you on. We'll argue some more later on down the line when all these trades get together. And, hey, hopefully you see in Baltimore here in September. I always say when the national writers are coming to town in September and October, it means you're playing good baseball. So we'll look forward to a couple trips into Camden Yards, and we'll make sure you don't get any tourist crab cakes, Scott.
That would be outstanding. I've always loved in particular the crab cakes over at Fadley's in Lexington Market.
Well, there you go. We'll walk on over there, man, and see if we can get you through the neighborhood as well. It's not as bad as they say it is, Scott.
I like it. I've always enjoyed those trips to Baltimore. Thanks, Nestor.
Always great having you on. Scott Miller, BBL, the way to find him out on Twitter. He's, of course, at Bleacher Report, tweeting, reporting, old school, new school, Hall of Fame voter, and all-around good dude. Love having him on. He's the national MLB columnist for Bleacher Report as well as Turner Sports. You can find me out in the Bayou Toyota Audio Vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world. Of course, Ravens coverage, first place Orioles coverage. It's some summertime here and hot at WNST. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Taos in Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports